Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Steve, it's always my pleasure to speak with you. We've worked together a long time over the years, and it's always been very, very productive and fruitful. So happy to be here.
Well, it's very kind of you. Thank you. So, before we really get into the interview, would you please introduce yourself and SPLC to our listeners?
Sure. My name is Sarah O'Brien. I'm the CEO of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. The SPLC, as we shorten it, is we lead a global community of purchasers, suppliers, advocates, and experts dedicated to building a sustainable world through the power of procurement. So our membership coalition, as you know, Steve, includes about 180 different organizations, distinguished organizations of all types, everyone from the scale of Microsoft down to small business, the scale of the US General Services Administration and Department of Energy down to tiny governments, and a really wide array of different types of business and government. So our purchasing members look to align and aggregate their approximately 700 billion in annual spend in favor of more sustainable, healthier, more equitable solutions. And that's really for the benefit of suppliers. We're trying not to ask for 1,000 things, but to ask for one thing with 1,000 asks behind it.
So, it's safe to say that your members are the customers of the cleaning industry.
Yes, they
And
are.
And members of the cleaning industry who sell or make or distribute or provide services in this area can also join SPLC as well, right?
They absolutely can. And we count on suppliers to join us in order to make sure that what we're looking for in the shared specifications and asks that we're making is reasonable, practical, achievable, and uniform, so that a supplier who is working on providing more sustainable services can be clear what marks they should hit, and clear that there is really a reward behind the effort that they're making.
Thank you. So now let me ask you, Sarah, why is sustainability important to you and to SPLC? So please share a little bit of the personal, what drives Sarah O'Brien, why do you care, and then why your organization cares?
Yeah. Well, I think there's alignment between those two things, clearly. And I think if most of us step back a bit, there's a lot of noise in the commercial forum about the practicality of sustainability, the rightness of it, whatever. But if most of us step back, I would say most people like myself want to see a healthy world, healthy individuals, healthy communities, a healthy economy, healthy businesses. I mean, we all want to thrive, and we don't necessarily want others to suffer in order for ourselves to thrive. So when it comes right down to it, that's what we're talking about with sustainability. We're talking about the kind of society that we can live in, where we can be sure that our marketplace, our homes, our communities are built around basic fairness, basic, support for human health and environmental thriving. I don't think these things are things that most people would say, I don't want that. But it's when we get into these more complicated discussions, things get, I think, a bit apart from that basic grounding. And we start, arguing over the finer details, and losing sight of that. So I would say personally and generally, I don't think it's too much to say that most of us want the kind of world that sustainability work is aimed at fostering. The SPLC really comes together to note that, 70 to 90% of most organizations' impact is in their supply chains. And that's impact for good or bad. Impact, for good in the sense of, employing people at fair wages, helping not harm the environment with their products or services, that kind of thing. And also, there is a great deal of negative impact in the supply chain. There's a lot of bonded labor, which is the equivalent of modern slavery. There's a lot of, climate emissions. There's a lot of things that we're doing that are not really working, again, to support that thriving and healthy world that we want to see. So our organizations understand, our organizational members understand that they can transform their business's impact by transforming the ways that they purchase products and services and helping their suppliers in turn transform the way they perhaps employ people or design their products or develop their products or transport their products. And we really were brought together through a multi-stakeholder coalition because the understanding was, again, if we're all asking for 200 different things, the poor supplier receives 200 requests around the same kind of performance metric. It's impossible to respond. You really honestly cannot respond individually to every supplier in that way. Or if you do, it's sucking energy out of innovating and making better products, right? So we're really built to be the channel between those sustainability-minded purchasers with their very large spend and suppliers who see sustainability as an innovation space, as a space for competitive differentiation, and as the avenue forward for the future.
I know you've been working on these issues, Kenley, for decades. Yes. And for those of you who don't know Sarah, you should get to know her. She has been a champion of this stuff literally for decades and has a wonderful background even prior to SPLC. But more than getting into the details, would you share some of your thoughts about the trends that you're seeing? So instead of getting into the weeds, help us look forward a little bit because so much is changing and changing quickly. So what trends do you see?
Well, as is probably not a surprise, I see climate and emissions performance coming to the fore, absolutely. Largely because of regulatory and legal structures that are being put in place at this point. They're not here yet, but any good business is looking forward and saying, okay, I'm going to have to align with some reporting regimes, with some vetting of data that I'm getting from suppliers. And so people are really, large customers of all types, are really looking to, at best, form partnerships with their suppliers or with organizations like this one to figure out together. No one knows how to do this stuff. It's really not something where everyone's over here, the cool kids already know how to do it, and it's no problem. Everyone has to kind of reframe how we do business so that data about emissions are gathered and calculated, at a facility where you're producing something. When you ask your transport and logistics company to take your product somewhere, they're going to have to report to you. So we all need to kind of align again, because there can be chaos, or we can settle on some really central definitions and some central ways to do this work and line up together. So that's a really critical one, and I think is going to take a lot of top of mind attention from particularly large corporate entities for the decade to come and beyond. I think that labor issues, equitable wages, safe, fair labor conditions, that kind of thing. For a long time, I think we thought, oh, those troubles are out in global supply chains. Yes, we know there's labor problems, but increasingly we see those labor problems being uncovered within the US, within the EU, within, what we think of as modern, safe, well-regulated democratic societies, where we thought this was a thing of the past. We're looking at, child labor violations showing up. There's a lot going on. And so I think that's something that is also really coming to the fore for people that, oh, I need to do my due diligence. I need to understand that the people that I'm asking to work with me and for me and produce products for me are not in some way violating my code of ethics, which I would not hold within my business. So that's a second. I would say the third and really interesting one is a kind of, call it relocalizing. Obviously, cleaning services are often local, even in a globally, global coverage company. But I think that the notion of community wealth building through, good employment, investment in the community, maybe finding suppliers more locally, manufacturing stuff within your region, that kind of thing is really coming to the attention of large purchasers who are really looking to particularly do benefit their own region or local area. So I would say those three, climate, 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 fair labor and protections for workers, and then related but differently, this local anchor, what people call anchor purchasing in many instances, spending your money where you are in order to lift up the community where you do business.
Thank you, Sarah. That's awesome. I have to share with you one of my concerns, if you don't mind, which
Yeah,
is while these issues are typically being driven by large corporations like some of your major, members, I'm always a little bit concerned that sustainability requirements will actually unintentionally prohibit small and medium-sized enterprises from participating because the
absolutely.
requirements become so complex. Only large suppliers are capable of fulfilling all the comments or
Yeah,
requirements. So I
yeah,
appreciate how you thought about sort of bringing all those things down to the one or two things, right?
yeah,
Not only for your members, but also for members of ISSA, because
sure.
they deal with such a broad array of these challenges, just information challenges that they don't have the resources. And they're actually the companies that we want to help. So,
No, exactly. I mean, I don't need to take us off to a long conversation, but I think that's critically important. And what's really important to understand is that most, even, large corporates, but right through folks who are trying to do sustainable purchasing, those two values of supporting and building small business and thereby building the community in which those small businesses do, operate, and raising the bar on environmental sustainability are both, have to both be kept in mind all the time. And so in many instances, people want to raise that bar, but if they're doing it, we always work on supplier development programs, reaching out, communicating, giving credit, finding ways to raise all boats so that your whole, supply chain or, your community of providers is coming along with you as the larger entity, not being left in the dust with giant corporate entities that can compete on these very technical aspects of the work, you know? So
yeah.
thinking about cooperative efforts, thinking about aligned efforts, thinking about making this less a matter of competitive differentiation and more a raising all boats kind of an approach is really, really critical to doing this work well.
Outstanding. Okay, so I'm going to change gears on you a little bit.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this stuff a long time, number of different industries and what have you. What advice do you have for companies who are just getting started on their sustainability journey? What do you see are the simple basics that they really need to pay attention to if they want to do this, do it well? And again, especially for smaller, medium-sized companies that don't have a team of 20 people they can, dedicate to sustainability issues.
Yeah, when I worked in the electronics industry, we would always say you have to remember a lot of small companies just have Uncle Bob in the back room who's dealing with all compliance and certifications and all of this stuff. And it can't be that you need a technical degree to comply, right? So I think that the advice for anyone addressing sustainability is the same, which is um, try to prioritize the things that are really relevant to your business, right? Don't take on the world of every issue. Don't try and reach the highest point of a certification. Really think about what is your path within the 1, 2, maybe 3 lanes that are really critical for you to succeed in moving toward being a more sustainable company. And I think those, again, are pretty much, you will be needing at some point soon. Your customers will begin asking, most likely, even if you're at the bottom of a sequence of folks who report up to some large customer, you're going to be asked about emissions data. That sounds terribly scary, but there are a lot of really simple calculators. There are a lot of simple methods where you put in, your electric consumption by month, and you put in some things about, recycling, and you put in some other factors, what are the materials you buy? And EPA and others have these free calculators, and you can get a very simple rough estimate of where you are. And that, for a smaller supplier, is a huge step forward, because then you can say, oh, okay, well, often some of them will suggest some opportunities that you might have. Oh, okay, maybe I could do more with whatever it might be that it suggests. Maybe I can install more LED bulbs, or take some simple steps again that are just practical and straightforward, and begin working in that area. You can look at starting to report. Organizations like what used to be called the Carbon Disclosure Project, that's now called CDP, have some very basic entry level stuff where you can plug in that first estimate and say, okay, well, next year I'm going to show you that I relamped and I did a few other things, and I think I'm doing better. I use that same calculator. It looks like I'm doing better. I get to report that next year and show that you're making progress. It's very small steps, but in a really critical area, right? Similarly with, the employment stuff, think about, gee, what is a living wage in your area? Is there something that you could use? And again, there are calculators and charts and things that are not, you don't have to calculate this yourself. Is there kind of a target for a living wage in my area that I might think about trying to very, very, very gradually creep up to? But having that intention, being able to say to my customers, yeah, I'm trying, I'm on a journey, but I understand there are issues sometimes, particularly in this sector, for folks who are at a pretty marginal economic level. So I want to do better. These things are really fairly common sense until you get way up the scale. And way up the scale, if you've worked there step by step, you've met more people, you've read more things, you've learned from your peers, and it starts to seem less complicated as you go. So I really encourage folks to look at, maybe those 3 areas of work, the local purchasing as well, and just make some small steps. And, one critical thing is ask your customers whether they can provide you with any support. Often if a larger firm is trying to, say, reduce their carbon emissions, they may have some program support that they can offer you to really, maybe do an analysis of what you're doing, maybe provide you with some suggestions, because they're trying to ensure that everybody they do business with is doing better in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. They'd be happy to offer those resources to you, but sometimes you have to ask. And you may not, your contact may not know. So ask your contact to go back and say, is there any support for this? Is there any preferred way that I should be doing this that you can give me some guidance on? That kind of thing can really be helpful.
So, Sarah, thank you for your comments about what companies should think about and look at. But I'm really interested if you have any specific advice for companies in the cleaning industry that they should consider.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, there are a number of things, as we've noted, really kind of labor practice and chemicals seem to be the core. But I think that, as far as, if we separate those out, as far as chemicals and supplies, paper products and others, looking for certified products, whether, there are a number of credible certifications out there. Certification, I know, sometimes gets a bad name because people think, oh, it's so onerous to gain certification for myself. But really, for companies that are providing cleaning services, certifications are the easiest ways often for you to meet a customer's demand for a credible green cleaning program. I'm using these types of certified paper products, these types of certified chemicals. I'm conducting training, which is aligned with these certifications. That's something that can be a very straightforward way for a supplier who needs to buy supplies in order to deliver the service, to ensure that they're within the boundaries of what the customer is looking for and be able to communicate that clearly. I think it's also something to consider in terms of if there are certification programs that you think, I might actually be approaching to the capability of, maybe just adding a few more things and I might be able to qualify. It's definitely a valuable way, again, to clearly and easily communicate to a customer, I know what I'm doing. Here's a training program or a certification that I have completed that I can communicate to you, my understanding and my capability. So that's a big one. I think on the labor side, there's been so much interesting work, and I know you've done some interesting work, Steve, yourself, on looking at how to structure contingent labor and labor practices generally in large service industries. I'm not an expert in that, but I would say, again, look for those programs, associations, other ways that people have come together to kind of hallmark some of this stuff, because that means you've had a lot of, great minds in the room. You've come to consensus. You know that this is not, you out there trying to figure out individually how to set a bar that delivers fair wages, fair employment conditions to workers. You're really building on the work of others, and perhaps ISSA has programs around this. I'm sure probably they do. But that kind of thing really, as we used to say 25 years ago when I started in environmental purchasing, wasn't called sustainable procurement then. We always said copy paste is the best way to do this stuff, because the more we align and reproduce the same best practices, the more impact we have, the easier it is to communicate, and the easier it is to reap the rewards of that little bit of extra labor that it takes to ensure that you are aligning with best practice and with healthy, safe, positive working conditions. Yeah.
Sarah, thank you. Before I let you go, any final thoughts, comments, anything that you'd like to share that we haven't touched upon?
Well, I guess, looking around at this year, at the world, I think that, one of the things that you and I have encountered a lot over the years is, well, is this really urgent? Is this really central to business? There's a lot of other stuff going on. And I look at sort of the climate crisis as a metaphor for this a little bit. It's like we've said that for years and years and years. Well, we can get to it. It's not going to be a big deal. And here we are, and it's getting to be a big deal. And it's getting to be a big deal in terms of business risk. It's not positive for the market to be unable to transport things or to have disasters that destroy whole warehouses. These are major business risks that we've sort of never recognized that way. We've put them off in sustainability and I've got to do business. And I think that the main thing that I take away at this moment in time is that these things are business risks. They are not something that it's not being nice for the flowers and the trees. It's really about being able to maintain stability, predictability, good relationships, and continue to build our businesses and create community wealth and family wealth and global wealth through doing so in an environment where we have de-risked a lot of this stuff because it's easy to do. Some of it is hard. So we'll get to a point where there are really hard problems that we maybe can't get at, but so much of this is known. How do you create a safer product? Well, there's millions of them out there. We know how to do it. How do you create better working conditions? Well, there are millions of organizations doing it. So it's both the knowledge is available much more readily than it used to be, and the criticality of these issues is much more obvious than it used to be. So for me, that's like, well, gee, that's kind of a no-brainer. Let's address these items. Let's address these issues to do business better and to thrive and create that positive economy, positive world that we want to see.
Sarah, thank you so much for spending some time with us. You're awesome, and we greatly appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.